Every day, something dramatic happens in the Caribbean that affects our lives. We'll give you the details. We'll give you the facts on Caribbean Perspective with Eddie Frederick. Here's Eddie Frederick.
So glad you can join us. The state is moving to investigate Guyana Elections Commission, GCOM. This story takes the lead in our 930th edition of Caribbean Perspective for Friday, 28th August 2020. Details after this important message.
The hurricane season is now upon us, so we as Caribbean people need to remember to think safety and be prepared. Avoid venturing outside during a storm or hurricane, especially if there are strong winds. Rooftops and other debris are often blown about and can cause great damage.
Welcome back. The state will discharge its responsibility in stringently investigating the operations of the March 2nd, 2020 regional and general elections. This is the promise of Guyana's new Attorney General Anil Nandlal. HGP's Kendall Richmond reports.
The Attorney General Mohabir Anil Nandlal has made it clear that the state has assumed conduct of the investigations as it pertains to GCOM's operations during the electoral process. This issue was described by the Attorney General as crucial during a recent media briefing.
The state has also indicated that the state will take over the private criminal charges pending and will discharge its responsibility in relation to investigating and prosecuting those charges, or maybe more charges that may be disclosed by the investigations.
The Attorney General has also indicated that the requisite agencies of state have also assumed conduct of the investigations.
The two agencies of the state engaged is the Guyana Police Force and the Guyana Police Force and the Director of Public Prosecutions. The Guyana Police Force is the investigative arm of the state, and the Director of Public Prosecutions is the prosecutorial arm of the state.
Nandlal stated that the Director of Public Prosecutions will have to determine whether or not prosecutors will be retained and who those prosecutors will be if the need arises, since it is within her constitutional remit to do so. At present, the Chief Elections Officer of the Guyana Elections Commission, Keith Lowenfield, is battling charges of fraud and misconduct in his handling of the March 2 elections. The charges allege that the CEO has conspired with persons who are unknown to reflect that tabulations shown by GCOM were accurate. The charges further allege that the CEO during the electoral process ascertained results which were known to be false. Reporting for the AGP Nightly News, Kendall Richmond.
The sun will rise tomorrow and so will I, are the words of Chief Executive Officer of the Central Housing and Planning Authority, CHNPA, Leland Saul, the latest public official in Guyana to have been sent packing by the PPP administration. The details in this report from Wendell Badri of HGP Nightly News.
It has come to light that the former Chief Executive Officer of the Central Housing and Planning Authority, CHNPA, Leland Saul, has been relieved of his duties effective Tuesday, August 25, 2020. While speaking with this newscast, Mr. Saul explained that he received a letter from the Minister's office detailing his termination as the CEO of the agency, but could not say what reason is being applied.
I have no idea, sir. Actually, I would have received letter stating that my services is terminated with effect from today. And the author of the letter would have extended his gratitude for the services rendered. And even though my services is terminated with effect from today, I was also told to proceed on leave with effect from today until the 23rd of September.
The former CEO, in spite of receiving a termination letter, related that he had also been asked to proceed on leave until the end of September. However, he is contending that he's no longer an employee of the company, and therefore leave would not be applicable in this instance. In relation to leave being granted, this newscast further inquired about payment of benefits which might have been accrued. Mr. Saul responded by saying,
No, nothing was mentioned about benefits.
Mr. Saul further clarified with this newscast that his appointment as the CEO of the Housing and Planning Authority was done according to standard operating procedures and was a transparent one. That is, the post was advertised, he applied and was interviewed, and subsequently deemed the best candidate. Leland had served at the helm of the agency for a period of 3 years and 6 months, according to his estimation. He spoke to some of his achievements while at the agency.
Some of the main things that I would have accomplished, I would have either successfully implement or supervise the work programs of the agency. Some of it entails international funded programs like the Adequate Housing and Urban Accessibility Program, the Sustainable Housing for Interland Program. Some of the local programs include Housing Solution 2017 and beyond and so on.
Leland, when asked whether he has any further comments regarding his removal, he acknowledged that senior management is allowed to do as it sees fit, in keeping with the best interests of the company, and accepts his fate thus far. When questioned about his next move and whether he has a fallback plan for income and employment, Snall stated,
I tell you what, tomorrow morning, the sun will rise. Because as far as I'm aware, the earth will continue to rotate and revolve until, and when the sun rises, I will be there to see the sunshine, sunrise. All right?
This newscast reached out to the Minister of Housing, Colin Crowell, for a comment on Mr. Saul's dismissal. However, he was unreachable at the time. Further, the Public Relations Department of the Ministry declined to offer any comment on the matter. Wendell Badri for HGP Nightly News.
You're listening to Caribbean Perspective with Eddie Frederick.
With Jamaica recording over 200 cases of COVID-19 since the start of the week, concerns are now being raised about additional measures to slow the spike. TVJ's Prince Moore has that story.
There have been 120 new cases of the coronavirus reported in the last 24 hours, bringing the island's total to 1,732. Members of the Homeless Administration have continuously asked the citizenry not to panic over the high numbers. It was one of the issues raised in the first of 3 debates for the September 3 general elections. To that, the Jamaica Labour Party's Christopher Tufton said,
So the future, in response to your question, depends heavily on the expanded public health network through community health aides who are in the communities, working with people. Also, continue to expand the public health system so that when persons are positive, we can treat them. But very importantly, the focus has to be on prevention, and that involves all of us.
But for the People's National Party's Dr. Dayton Campbell, pre-testing will be a critical component in dealing with the present COVID-19 situation. He says every person arriving in the country will have to do a PCR test 72 hours before arriving. This suggestion was also made by the Jamaica Hotel and Tourist Association earlier this year. Dr. Campbell further promised that the People's National Party government would invest in more reliable technology to ensure that the geofencing mechanism, which is now in place, works more effectively.
What happens now is that with the geofencing technology, persons leave their phones at home and go out. And so what we have is increased exposure. We will ramp up testing, because what has happened is that there was a lot of excitement about testing at the ports, but you were not able to get back the result. As a result of that, you ended up with a backlog, and that made contact tracing almost impossible.
He says directives from the technocrats in the health ministry will be adhered to. This comes in the face of increased infections, which the Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Jacqueline Bisesa Mackenzie, has linked to celebrations over the Emancipation and Independence holidays.
The advice that was given about the Emancipation holidays was not taken by this administration. We will listen to the technocrats. We will ensure that we have increased community health aides to do the contact tracing. We'll mobilize volunteers. We'll ensure that the medical facilities are actually equipped and working.
Prince Moore, TVJ News.
People testing positive for COVID-19 no longer have to be admitted to hospital and can now be quarantined at home except in particular cases. This is as it relates to a new regulation in Trinidad and Tobago. More in this TV6 report with Alicia Boucher.
The number of COVID-19 cases continue to rise exponentially. In the Ministry of Health's update number 420 on Wednesday morning, an additional 132 persons tested positive for COVID-19, bringing the total number to 1,384 positives, with a number of active cases at 1,177. As a consequence, capacity at hospital facilities is decreasing. At the Couva Hospital, there are 108 cases, and at Cora, there are 63. 432 patients were listed as being en route to hospital or in the process of being admitted, while another 200 were being processed for admission. Minister of Health Terence Yelsing says there is a new adjustment.
From today, we will now officially institute our next phase escalated response. What does this mean? It means that from today, we'll be asking certain categories of persons to self-isolate, whether it's at home or whether it's at elsewhere in a hotel or other setting. We are going to be strictly enforcing the quarantine orders.
According to Chief Medical Officer Dr. Roshan Parasram, COVID-19 positive patients would no longer need a negative test to be discharged from a step-down facility.
What we are doing is we are going to two categories. So the first category for symptomatic persons, if you spend 10 days from the date of onset of your symptoms, 3 days plus 3 days with no symptoms at all, we will discharge you to your home, giving you a quarantine order to stay for further 7 days at your home without a diagnostic test being done. And you can be assured after that period that you won't be able to transmit the virus to anyone else.
It's a similar process for asymptomatic persons.
But your 10-day period will start at the point that you had a positive test, rather than at the point that you began to have symptoms. So 10 days plus the 7 days at home for those individuals that had no symptoms throughout the process.
Only persons who are moderately to severely ill would be admitted to hospital. Clinical telephone interviews would be done by officials attached to the county medical officers of health, and arrangements would be made to transport those persons to Cora and Couva.
If, of course, in between those calls, persons have worsening symptoms, you can take yourself either to any of the emergency departments or call the GMRTT ambulance service on your own.
Mild cases would be home quarantine for the duration, which lasts on average 20 days. As for the penalty for breaching the quarantine order,
in terms of the quarantine fee, I believe, I think that change occurred a couple years ago in terms of the Quarantine Act.
Yeah.
The fine had gone up to $6,000. It was $480, I believe. Anything can be given consideration. So we will consider a possible increase, but I think we really need the population to exhibit personal responsibility and ensure that you all stay at home. It is not something that we want to enforce.
But breaches to the public health regulations, such as going to the beach, carry a maximum fine of $50,000 and up to 6 months in prison. In comparison, the $6,000 fine, especially if you are COVID-19 positive, can appear meager. However, Dr. Parasram says it's not set in stone. Alicia Boucher, TV6 News.
I am Eddie Frederick, wishing you a restful weekend. This has been Caribbean Perspective, a whole new approach to highlighting developments in the Caribbean. In the meantime, please continue to log on to CaribbeanPerspective.com for more daily news and more.